Google Maps, a technology that has enhanced many people's lives and web applications. I have implemented the Google Maps API several times, back in the day with HTML, CSS, jQuery. And I've also done it in Angular or Ionic, which are single-page application frameworks similar to Blazor. Today we're going to implement it in Blazor. These single-page application frameworks, it got a little tricky because you didn't want to, well, you wanted to load the map in a certain component or page, which were only rendered after doing some interactions or after some loading time and so on. And then you had to make sure that all of the pieces were loaded in the correct order. The approach I took back in the day is now legacy, but you can still use it. And Google added 2 extra approaches which are more compatible with the single page application frameworks. So let's use one of those. I'll just be going over this overview. So the first step would be to enable the JavaScript Google Maps API and the Google Cloud dashboard, then to create a new credential, an API key, then initialize, so use the Google Maps API scripts to initialize the API functionality, and then initialize the actual Google map. And afterwards, we'll attempt to add a marker to the map, so point of interest. And we can take a look at customizing the map's style and colors. So first thing would be to look for Google Maps, I think it's JavaScript API. And make sure this API is enabled. The next thing would be to set up a new credential. Let's create a new one for this demo, an API key. I will revoke this one after the video. Okay, so we've got this API key. Just copy it in. You can then edit the API key, which is important to add some restrictions. I sometimes make 2 API keys, one for local development, which then restricts on, or has almost no restrictions, just on localhost or something. And then my production one that restricts on the domains that I'm going to use it on. So kisco.com, for example. Let's see, video demo. Google Maps API. Then we could, so like I mentioned, say websites, but those are live websites, or could try localhost. Simply add one, and you can use wildcards. You could add an IP address, maybe 127.0.0.1 or 0000. You can try that. I'm just going to go with none for now. Restrict key, you can restrict the APIs that it's going to use. I only want this key to be used for the Maps JavaScript API, and then save it. You can take out this one. We copy the key, so we're good to go. Load the Maps API key. I'm going to open that one. Then you've got 3 approaches. So dynamic library import is the one I'm going to be showing you in this video. Direct script loading tag, that's the one we used to use back in the day, which is now labeled as legacy. And then you've got the npm JS API loader package. That's more for the JavaScript developers, the ones that use Angular, React, Node.js, whatever, to kind of bundle that into their projects. So that's not for us. So let's just take a look at the so-called legacy approach, which would be loading a script with the source maps Google APIs, add your API key, loading async, and then callback is a method that you can specify. The tricky part here is that you can't really know in your Angular application or your Blazor application or whatever single page application framework you're using when this init map gets triggered and when it's done and so on. Maybe the expert JavaScript developers can solve that quickly, but that's not going to be for us. You can see all of the possible parameters, but it's good to know, but let's not focus on that. Then for the npm, for the node-based applications, with the node package manager, you can load it as follows. But let's not focus on that. We are going to use this dynamic library import, which is this bottom one. It's also the first one on the page. Let's see. So the difference here is, instead of a source that you have here, we have a self-executing JavaScript function, which will load the source. And that function accepts some parameters, so your API key, the version, weekly, quarterly, beta, alpha, and but you can also add a language, so a locale. Dutch would be NL, English EN, French FR, you know the deal. Then libraries, we'll take a look at that later. That could be another parameter. Comma separated would be maps, marker, and all of the libraries that we'll be using. So then underneath, once that's successfully initialized, we can, so that should load the libraries at the runtime and should prevent us from loading this multiple times and so on. Once that happens, we can simply init the Google Maps with the following code. So this is the function and we're just executing it right away. But, well, we can choose when to execute that. In our case, we're going to have Blazor trigger this method using a JavaScript interop. If you're not too familiar with JavaScript interrupts and Blazor, I wrote a few articles on the matter, the role of JavaScript and Blazor wasm, just some background information. And then JavaScript interop with Blazor WebAssembly. You can find that in my blog section. Importing JavaScript modules into Blazor, which we're going to be doing. By now, I already put all of that code into a NuGet package. And the original code, along with all of my other NuGet packages, you can get that code by simply signing up at kisscode.com here at the top for free, or by clicking on this product and signing up. So let's continue by creating just a new Blazor project. I'm going to be using the Blazor web app, so with the server and the client projects. And I'm going to be creating a custom Google Maps JavaScript file, and I'm going to create a module, so like a JavaScript class that we can then call using the Blazor JsInterop. So we can import that module, and then from then on we can call init map or add marker and so on. So I've got this new Blazor web app project here. I'm not going to touch it in terms of setup. In some other videos I moved everything from the server to the client project. That's just my preference. Let's not waste too much time on that. Let me create a directory, JavaScript, add a JS file. Let's call it custom Google Maps JS. Oops, JSON, that's not what I meant to do. Then I'm going to create a JavaScript class, call it custom Google Maps JS, and make sure to make that globally available. Window dot, just gonna say. And then within that class, we could simply paste in, well, or just in the file, we could simply paste in that self-executing function. That should be good, but we're going to wrap it in a method. Since we're now in a class, we want to control when to initialize that, and not on a pager component that doesn't use the Google Maps functionality. So let's wrap that into a method. Say static import dynamic library I already made all of this code for the NuGet package, of course. And we're going to, let's see, we could just paste all of that in here. Should be fine. So G is now holding all of the parameter values, so the key, the version, and so on. Going to take out those parameters like that, and then just gonna make it a little prettier. Oops. So yeah, these last parentheses are making the function execute, self-executing function. So right away, let's remove that. Yeah, my editor prettified that. That's not necessary. But anyway, static load maps API. And let's just do it like that. Then we need to call this .import dynamic library. So key is API key, v version libraries, which are set by default to maps and marker. That's the ones we'll need unless we want to do something really fancy. Language to Dutch, we could put it to English, region to Belgium. So that's just loading the script. Nothing about initializing the actual Google Maps. So now I'm going to go to the Blazor client application and I'm going to make some extension methods on the JS runtime. These extension methods are just a preferred way for me to do that, some kind of class that holds all of these methods. I'm just going to call it extensions, make it a static class, and add some static methods. We're going to use the JS runtime, extend on it, and I called it import custom Google Maps JS async. Name it what you want. And we're simply doing void async, which means we don't need a return type or anything. We're just going to import the JavaScript, the custom Google Maps JS module. Let's use this right away. So on the home page component, I'm going to inject the IJS runtime, make sure you use the interface, and call it JS runtime, add a code tag, since that's required for when you're in this pre-rendered setup, you can only use the JavaScript interop once the interactivity kicks in. So let's make this async, and then we could say wait JS runtime dot import custom Google Maps async. That's simply importing this custom JS file, this class with all of its functionalities. We're not executing this script or loading the Maps API just yet. I added another extension method, load Google Maps API async, which is going to invoke this load Maps API method from this module. In that one, we're simply invoking, so this load Maps API method, but we have to pass down the parameters like the API key, the version, the language, and so on. For that, I made a class object or a record. Google Maps load config, the required API key, and the rest is optional. But I filled them with some default values. So libraries, maps marker, that's going to be important later on to add a marker. For now, we just need the map stuff. Then we can use that extension method on our component, load maps API async, and pass down the object. I'm only going to paste in the API key, and the rest you can override if you want to. Okay, then we finally arrived at the point that we're actually going to add the map HTML element on the page or component and initialize that with few of the parameters like a latitude, longitude for the center and a zoom level. And we need that map HTML element with the ID of whatever you want. You could say, call it map to be simple. So I'll add another JavaScript method to do exactly that. But first, let's make a property. And then I'm going to copy the init map async. That looks as follows. So the element ID, which is the HTML element with ID of map. So that would contain map. I added map ID, that's something different. We'll look at that later. That's in the Google Cloud Console, that you need to create a map and then you can use that ID. That's for styling purposes and to add the markers to advanced markers too. We'll see that later. Center, what we discussed, the latitude, longitude, and the zoom, just the zoom level. I added controls that's going to allow you to disable, let's say, the street view control, or at least not show that on the map, hide that from the map. And then there's some other controls like the zooming, satellite map. Maybe you don't want that, so you can hide those. Controls, we simply import the maps library. So one, you saw maps and marker. So we're just using the maps one for now. Color scheme you could get from another library, the core library, if I'm not mistaken. So that would be more like this. And there's many more libraries. Then we're going to initialize a new map, fill it in this property, get the element by ID. So now we need that HTML element to actually exist before we call this method, invoke this method. Pass down the center, the zoom, map ID controls, and that's about it. Now we can make an extension method to invoke that JavaScript method. So our extension method, init Google Map Async on the JS runtime, invoking that init map async, that new JavaScript function. We're going to need to pass the parameters. So let me add those. So what was that again? Center, zoom, and all those, and map ID. So these are the Google Map options. So element ID string, map ID string, we'll fill that in later. Google Map coordinate, simply latitude, longitude, zoom, an integer, but it could actually be a double, I think, or decimal. And then the controls, I'm going to paste that in, but don't focus on that too much. Could be something like Google Map controls, zoom control, camera control, map type, blah, 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 all set with default values. So then we could do it like that. That should be enough. Even this, we could even fine grain that even more and even like position, add a position for the zoom control and so on. But that's gonna be an expansion. Okay, let's initialize that Google Maps object. We'll first need a map, HTML element. Let's define that here. Maybe you can put that into a parameter. Let's call it element ID. Let's just call it by default map. Now we have element ID, div ID, element ID, and we're going to set the height to 100. And then it's best to wrap this in some kind of container so you don't take the entire page. Let's we could say style height 700 px. Okay, now we're safe to initialize that application, that map, sorry, Google Maps, and then we need that new Google Map options. What do we start with? Element ID, map ID, which we'll create in a minute. Google Map coordinates, let's see. Let's gonna be, let's just set it to null null for now. Gonna copy some in later, and the rest is optional. Well, maybe I'll show you how to what those controls do later on in the video. Let's leave it like this. Let's focus on this map ID, which we'll need later on actually to add markers. Let's for now maybe just put in a default one. So in here you kind of have this default map ID. Let's use that for now. And then let's worry about our own map ID once we advance to the markers. Let's run that and see what happens. We may want to run the project on HTTPS. Sometimes that's a requirement for these kind of APIs. Let's see. So now we have a map in the middle of nowhere. Probably the center of the Google Maps. Let's put in some actual coordinates. Let's go to the Google Maps. Let's go to Monaco somewhere. Just put the pin down. Yeah, whatever. And then at the top, we are going to paste these coordinates. That's latitude, longitude, and the zoom level. Let's see. I hope I'm not swapping them. Okay, let's try that again. So that's just going to zoom us in on Monaco, and you see all of these controls in my language since I picked Dutch. So card, satellite, full screen, street view, and the zoom controls. And now we're centered around Monaco, which are the latitude and longitude that I passed. Okay, so let's just set a zoom. Oops. Going to maybe zoom out a little, so put it at 8. And we're going to try these controls. So new controls. Let's paste some in. Zoom control true, camera control false, map type false, scale control false, street view false, rotate false, full screen control false. So we're actually only going to have the zoom control, those plus and min buttons. And that's exactly what you see. We only have the plus and min. We are zoomed out a little bit due to zoom level 8. Very nice. So I implemented this NuGet package on my own website. Let's have a look. What you often want is not only a Google map, but actually also some markers on there. And you can style these markers and put some text in there, or icons even, and a lot of cool things. Also on this website I have the Google Places API and so on. I already have all that code. I may put that in other NuGet packages. So let's continue adding some markers to our map. Let's hop back over to the custom Google Maps JS. Important to note, you can find all this code in this overview. We're kind of at the add markers to map step. We used the API keys, we loaded the API script, we added the Google map to the web page, the HTML element, and initializing that map. And now we can add a marker to a map, but for that we need our own map ID potentially. Let's try it with the default one first. To a map. It's going to tell you can change color scale, icon, image, and so on, even the entire graphic. You can also create markers using HTML, CSS, entirely customized. And how it's usually done within the init map function, you can create all the markers that you want, give them a position, make sure they target the correct map. And then you can add a listener. We're going to support adding multiple markers at once instead of one by one. We simply import the library marker, and then for each marker, we are going to so the marker usually should have a position, so the longitude, latitude. Clickable is optional. A pin is optional, I'll show you later. Info is for that info window, and pin is then you can customize the color and the text. So just simply for each marker, we're going to create a marker added to this map, this property map. Give it a title, it's more for the info window. Position, latitude, longitude is clickable, and content could be to customize your actual marker. If it's not clickable, there's no use of adding this click event listener, which is simply going to, if info window is already open, let's close that, set the header content to the title and set some more body content to whatever you want. This can, not the header content, but the normal content can contain HTML. And also this pin can contain HTML, for example, to add an icon instead of a letter. I didn't want to bombard you with all of the work I already put in, so I'm going to add it gradually. Let's add the info window in. Let's add the pin element in to style the marker. Then create one info window. Yeah, that's quite unique. One info window to use for all. That's why we're closing. Yeah, I'm not noticing others closing when I'm opening another one. Anyway, let's get the title and the content from the info. I'll show you that later. It's a little object, title, content. Then from the pin, I did quite some work on this already. We can specify background, color, hex code, border color. Glyph could be text or contain some HTML with an icon. Glyph color, the text color. Is glyph icon, I added that property, and then the scale of the pin, yeah, default to 1, but usually 1.2 or 1.5 is a bit more user-friendly. Simply added some conditional code, whether we want to support an icon. Then we need to create a div element and set the content. So could be a span tag or an I tag with a bootstrap icon defined, like I showed you on my website. And then setting the glyph content. If it's an icon, use the icon, otherwise just use the text. Then we're going to use that within a pin element, which came from the marker library. New pin element, background color, border color. Glyph is either text or icon. Glyph color and scale. We don't need that as glyph icon. So now we have everything. I'll be posting all of that code to my Patreon, so make sure to check that out at patreon.com/gestupid. Okay, next up, let's add an extension method to add those markers from Blazor. That's also the last method I'm going to add Google Markers async, invoking that new JavaScript method, passing down our markers, passing that down as an IEnumerable. For some reason, an array did not do the trick. You can always pass these things down as an anonymous object and then specify all of the, for example, key equals and so on. I just like to use these records. Okay, let's add these parameters. Google Map Marker info. Simply created 3 records. Google Map Marker info, which can have that info title content, which you see here. For the info window, the Google Map coordinates, which is that latitude and longitude again, is clickable whether to, well, have an info window. You can set that to false if you don't want the markers to be clickable. Google Map marker pin to style the entire marker, which can have a hex code background color, border color. I think it can also just contain white or red or color names like the CSS names. Border color glyph could be either text or the icon HTML. You can even put in SVGs and so on, but let's check out the documentation before you do that. Glyph color is a bit like the text color. Glyph icon, yeah, that's one I added. And then the scale, I set that to 1.2, but sometimes 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. You can see an example here of a styled marker, so with a purple background color, and then the glyph color is some kind of gold or yellow, then the border color is the same. If I go back to my application, see sometimes, so I've got a green background color, a white border color, a white glyph color, and sometimes I change these colors, for example, and instead of a letter, I can add in the bootstrap icon. Okay, so now we can use this method in our JS runtime add Google Maps map async, and we are going to need a new start with info. So new marker info, title string. Let's see. Content. Next position is required. New coordinate. Let's set it close to this one, to the center. Still try to do that at least. Oops. Okay, what's next? Clickable, default true. Then we could style it. I'm not gonna waste time on styling it right now. Okay, I had a little error about destructuring that pin, which didn't program too well. Let's see, pin, just a new pin. Then you could say, I think maybe just black, border color white. Let's see, could set a text. Oh, I'm gonna have to default those things. Could be anything. Could say white again. False. Scale 1.5. Okay, let's try that. Okay, so now we've got our scaled 1.5 black marker with a T, and it's in the ocean. If we click it, we get the header content, foo, and bar as the content. This could have been HTML, but sometimes it's a bit awkward if you have can't really add HTML in this title, as far as I know. So which makes if you add in an H1, 2, or 3 tag, then you get a strange thingy. But then again, you can use HTML to lay out the entire thing. You have this close control. You can also hide that control by fine-grained control settings. You could also have a close event listener. Once we close that, we could do something, or hide this button, and once we click again, close it, something like that. Now we can just add multiple markers, of course. Let's try that. And then we have got ABC with the their own. Okay, see this one closing when this one opens. This one opens others close. That's good. I don't think that's the case. No. For some reason. It's the same code. Okay, the last thing I can show you is to customize the map, so the colors and the attributes. So you could go to customize map style and colors, which should take you to another tutorial to do that. Let's see. Seems like the same thing. So here it explains to create a style of the map and then link that to your map ID. Let's first create a map ID. You can, so this is a tutorial. Anyway, you could go to your Google Cloud and just say like map management. Then you can add a map. Demo Google video map. I don't know what I called it before. Map type, JavaScript. Then you can choose between raster and vector. Raster would be more pixelated and vector smoother. And you can add some more stuff. And then you can associate a map style. But let's create a new one. Well, if I used the one that I pre-styled, then you're gonna see I removed a bunch of stuff and I made these some of the labels lighter. We saved. It could take up to 5 minutes. So in the meantime, let me just show you how to create a map style. Is map styles. Create a new map style. And then you can, that's what I meant. You see like these commercial things, maybe you don't want that on your map. So point of interest, you can do it really fine-grained, like remove the retail stuff, or you can do the entire point of interest thing. So disable the labels or recolor the labels. So now I removed those commercial things and maybe remove the shape entirely. Which other one did I do? Maybe the political one. Let's see what that gives. I think I left that on, but just recolored some of it. Because you need to make sure if you remove too much, then you kind of get lost. You don't know where you are, like this. It's maybe useful for some cases, but not to navigate. So these are the labels. So we got the streets back, but we want to see the actual streets, just like that. But we could recolor these things. Let's see. Maybe just put a ridiculous color on there. So red, white is fine. Yeah. I think you get the ID, and then it's important to save and publish. Style. Oops. Did I publish that? No. We need to add our map ID first, I think. If you do this, I think you, okay. Save. It's saved, but did we publish that thing? Yeah, maybe it is. Okay, so we need to copy that map ID into our code. Instead of this default one. And now you see those red labels. Okay, and then what's left is make markers clickable and accessible. We kind of already went over that. We can even make them draggable. And then another thing to check out would probably be map events, controls, things like that. Maybe use Blazor to control the Google map. Maybe once something happens within the map, do a callback to Blazor to update whatever needs to be updated. But I'll likely add all of the functionality to my NuGet package, which is in here. And this basically everything that I showed you now, it's put into encapsulated components. Cool. Do check out the Patreon. I'm going to put the source code there. If you want the source code of the NuGet packages, do check that, to subscribe to get that. And you can simply use these in your project, just like I did in mine. Leave a like, subscribe if this was valuable, and see you in the next one.